boy, oh boy, did Bekzat Almakhan sure make things interesting for Umar Nurmagomedov in that first round. And listen, if it weren't for Umar's just years of repetition, muscle memory, and second nature, we could have been looking at a first-round knockout for Bekzat.
Yeah.
Umar let DC in on a little secret in his post-fight victory speech, and that is that he was knocked out. He did not see that punch coming, and he said that he woke up on the canvas and wrestled up to that single leg. So if it weren't for just years of practicing that particular technique, he would have been in some serious trouble. Now, we got to break down Umar's performance because at the end of the day, it was a 30-26, 30-26, and 30-25 victory.
Right.
So it was a dominant victory, but I think we can certainly all be rest assured in the fact that Bekzat Almakhan is going to be a problem for years to come in the UFC, whether he decides to compete at flyweight or at 135.
Absolutely. And look, he was a serious underdog in this fight, and for good reason. Making your UFC debut is always a difficult feat, and then doing it against the guy that most people think is the best fighter skill-wise in your entire division is a whole nother level. Look, Umar looked really good in there, but that first few minutes, that first minute or so was very, very telling as to what Umar saw out of Bekzat striking. Everybody knew going into this that he's like 17-1, 13 KOs. So the young man, and he's pretty small, has a lot of power. But Umar realized after getting touched by one of them, look, I'm not going to play this game. I'll look pretty getting a flashy KO next time. Right now, I need to focus on getting my hand raised, maintaining that undefeated record, and get this debuter out of here in some sort of way that I'm more familiar with. And a lot of people like to say that grappling is the safer of the two options, right? You can either strike with somebody or grapple, and that's absolutely the truth. If you can get somebody down and then have the stats come out like we saw, Umar Nurmagomedov's ground strikes were like 130 plus to maybe less than 10, single digits for Bekzat. That's just a smart play on his point. And I think going into this fight, it was a short notice fight for Bekzat. Obviously, he gets to call up to the big leagues on very short notice, and he has to do it against Umar. He didn't bat an eye, but neither did Umar. He needs to get a lot of credit for that because you don't truly know what a guy's bringing to the table until you see him competing in the UFC. Once you have him in there against a couple of guys that maybe you fought or maybe a couple of guys that you have also fought, then you get a better feel for how he is. But Bekzat was a relative unknown. Nobody really knew anything about him other than he's pretty dangerous on the feet and he looks like a promising prospect. I think yesterday he answered all those questions, and he certainly is a very dangerous prospect. Like you were saying, flyweight seems like it might be the better division for him because Umar looked so much bigger, but I think with a full camp, he could still give a lot of trouble to a lot of the bantamweights.
Yeah, and he's only 26 years old, so he'll definitely fill out his frame.
For sure.
And to be that good, and he's very resilient. You know, Umar, when he gets you on the ground, and a lot of people were very critical of Umar with regards to taking that fight to the ground all 3 rounds. But the reality of the matter is Bekzat came out as a man on a mission.
Yeah.
Right as soon as the bell rang, he came across the cage and threw a power high kick to Umar's head. And one thing that you almost never do to a grappler with the skill level of Umar Nurmagomedov is give them a high leg that early on in the fight. But Bekzat was very confident in his skills. He bit down on his mouthpiece. He backed Umar up a little bit, landed that big power shot. And Umar said, look, as you said, I'll make it look pretty next time. But this time I got to get my hand raised and I have to go back to my bread and butter. And that's exactly what his corner told him to do. Khabib would be happy with that performance. You know, you don't want to stand there and trade with a guy who obviously has the power to put you down. So I don't fault Umar for that. And it makes me very excited for the future of Bekzat because if he can put a guy like Umar on the ground, you know, 125ers and 135ers certainly need to take notice that this guy is going to be a force to be reckoned with in years to come in the UFC. But speaking specifically about Umar's performance, he looked really good once he got the fight to where he is most comfortable operating. And it was not a situation where he made it boring on the ground. He was advancing position. He was looking to, you know, work towards a submission or work towards a ground and pound victory the entire time that he was on the ground. He was working back takes. He was working the mounted position, landed some really beautiful elbow strikes that were in close range, some beautiful punches up the middle when he was trying to look for the rear naked choke and stuff like that. Bekzat's just a tough guy, man. Most guys would have tapped out. Most guys would not have been in there come the 15-minute mark, but Bekzat just showed his true heart. And Umar said after the fight, that guy is one tough cookie because a lot of people would have given up with half the amount of strikes and half the amount of submission attempts that Umar threw at him. So credit to Bekzat, but I think the natural next step is Corey Sandhagen, right?
I think so.
You kind of know Cheeto and Sean have to shake things out this coming weekend. Obviously, Merab did what he needed to do against Henry Cejudo to earn himself the next title shot. And so that makes for what would be the next number one contender. And I think Umar versus Sandhagen is the right fight to make for that. And a lot of people are complaining, hey, Umar didn't get this debut fighter out of there, so he doesn't deserve a number one contender shot. But I'll disagree with that a little bit because, one, Bekzat is not your normal debut fighter.
Right.
And two, I bet you dimes to donuts, half of the top 10 of the bantamweight division, if not more, would have said, yeah, I'm all set if they were offered the Bekzat Almakhan fight.
Yeah, they're not just going to give some guy who's never fought in the UFC their chance at cracking into the top 10 on the debut. Umar did. He was like, you know what, I've got a number next to my name. It's pretty good, and I'm well on my way towards the top of the division. But this guy's helping me save my fight. And like you said, Corey Sandhagen versus Umar is the fight we all want to see. It was promised to us, and then some things happened. We weren't able to get that. But I think that's the fight stylistically and X's and O's wise the fans want to see. I think it would be highly entertaining. And look, we saw Umar in there with Bekzat against a very dynamic striker. Sandhagen's exactly like that. Yep. He's an unorthodox. He throws a lot of interesting things, and if you aren't ready for him, and more importantly, if you don't get a full camp to prepare for him, he's going to wind up catching you. And look, Umar has the grappling in his back pocket. He can pull to it at any time he needs to, and I think that's just really impressive because up until now, we haven't really seen Umar have to go to that. He's got so many great tools in his striking arsenal that he's able to just, basically piece people apart with his striking, and he can get pretty open with his striking, not really have to worry about the threat of a takedown or the threat of somebody else trying to put some serious offense on him. He's kind of just looked really good in every fight. And while this one was very impressive in my eyes, a lot of people were like, oh man, Umar should have stood and banged with this guy. The guy saved the card. Like, no, I disagree with that. Umar realized very quickly that he didn't know everything this guy was going to bring, and he didn't get the full camp to prepare for it. And that's why he was sort of forced into taking this guy to the ground. And look, there was never a time in that entire fight from the first round where he had total back control for like a couple of minutes, if I'm wrong, 3.5 minutes of back control. And that speaks volumes to Bekzat's defense, because usually if a guy with the last name Nurmagomedov is on your back for 3 minutes,
you're tapping
soon. You're calling the fight. Somebody's going to get you out of there pretty quickly. But he looked good in there, and that's why Umar had to switch his game up a little bit, and he went with the position over submission, or in this case, position over striking rule. And he didn't have to, posture up and come with these big wind-up punches while they were on the ground. He was able to utilize some good hand technique, some wrist control, and throw some nasty elbows over the top. The way he was able to stay close to Bekzat, to not give him very much opportunity to get up more than a couple of times, was really impressive. He was able to find his strikes, and like I said, 130 plus is a ton of activity, even if it was on the ground, and even if it didn't look like he was throwing them, from the ceiling all the way down to Bekzat's face, he was still getting the job done. He was still wildly active, and I'm glad they didn't try to stand it up just because they thought maybe the crowd or whatever would have not liked it if there would have been a bunch of boos going on. Umar did what he had to do to get his hand raised, and he looked really good doing it. I just think now people are going to look at Umar and be like, okay, I thought for a second he was more of a striker, less of a grappler. Now there's going to be people realizing, okay, he's just like some of the other guys that come out of his camp on the ground, so we need to avoid that. It is as advertised. Nurmagomedov is maybe the most dominant grappling last name in all of MMA, and you have to realize his striking's just as lethal, but we realized quickly last night that Bekzat has just as lethal striking, and I think everybody is in trouble if they try to stand up on the feet with Bekzat moving forward at the bantamweight division.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So Umar Nurmagomedov does have some things to work on when he goes back to the drawing board, because he did admit that that punch he didn't see coming.
Yeah,
And
he didn't see it until they showed him on the highlights afterward. He didn't even see the shot coming. And, not to make a joke about it, but he had the best seat in the house to see that punch coming, and he didn't see it coming.
And so when you think about the potential matchup with Corey Sandhagen, Corey does create some interesting awkward angles, and he can throw punches. He's very creative.
Yeah.
He's very dynamic. His combinations don't always follow the textbook, and they're not super orthodox. So if Bekzat can hit you with a shot that you don't see coming, Corey certainly can. And so Umar's camp, I'm sure, will reassess that, and they'll work on some things in the striking realm. But it shows you how tough he is and how good his ability and awareness is to start and engage the grappling exchanges, even when you're buzzed, or in this case, when you're actually knocked out and you wake up on the ground, you can still go right back to your bread and butter. That makes him very difficult to finish. You almost have to immediately follow up with the shots once you knock him down, or you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of a single or a double leg in literally less than 2 seconds time. So interesting matchup. The takeaways for me are two things. One, Bekzat Almakhan has a great future in the UFC. I think he's going to be a name we need to get familiar with. He's going to be around for a long time. And two, Umar Nurmagomedov, while he is an elite level bantamweight, there are some things that he can work on. And I think if he were to go in there with Corey Sandhagen, he'll need to brush up on his striking a little bit. And that's a very interesting fight. But that fight should be for the #1 contender after Merab gets his shot.
I totally agree. And I think after Bekzat answered the call, took this fight, it was very difficult. He didn't get his hand raised. He got beat up doing it. The UFC needs to throw him a little bit of a bone. Maybe not make him a 5-1 underdog and put him in there with a 7-1 favorite like Umar Nurmagomedov.
Bet your bottom dollar Bekzat will have minus odds on his next fight.
That's right. And not like he needs a little bit of help from the UFC, but come on. He did you guys a favor, scratch his back a little bit.
That's right.